Alright guys, time for a quick review of Numbers chapters 28 through 30. This one's going to be unfortunately very shallow because as I read the Bible and then reading up through my follow-up sources, unfortunately most of them said pretty much the same thing. So, in Numbers chapter 28, God talks again to Moses and commands him to remind the children of Israel to observe the sacrifices and offerings that are to be done in their due seasons. The Passover, for example, and the instructions on how these are to be done and how many of these are to be done of the sacrifices is continued in Numbers chapter 29. And through these, because Israel is getting ready to enter into the promised land, and God ordered the people around the tabernacle in the wilderness, according to the space, but now God is ordering the Israelites around the times, and hopefully by Israel observing these times, now they are reminded of who God is and what God did for them, and hopefully they don't disobey God like the previous generation has and currently still does. Now, it does say that Israel at the end here we see that Moses told the children of Israel according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, implying that Israel is obeying. And here Numbers chapter 30, and 30 is a number that a lot of people associate with one's calling. If a man vows, this talks about how if a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears to an oath to bind his soul with a bond, that he is under obligation to do whatever he vowed to God to do, because a vow to God is to be taken seriously. And this chapter goes on to explain how a woman vowing should be handled. If this woman is living in her father's house under her father, then if her father doesn't allow her to keep the vow, then she's free of the vow because she has to do what her father says. And so God's not going to hold that against her. Or if the woman is married and her husband allows her to keep the vows, likewise if she's living with her father and not married, then if her father allows her to perform the vow, then obviously she's obligated to keep that vow. And likewise, if her husband allows her to keep that vow, she's under that vow. But if the husband doesn't allow her to keep the vow, then the vow isn't held against her, or she's free of the vow, same as if her father weren't to allow her. If the husband does allow her to keep the vow but doesn't really help her to keep the vow, or if she doesn't keep the vow, then obviously it's held against her. And but also if her husband if he shall in any way make them void after, it says here in chapter 15, but if he shall in any ways make them void after he hath heard them, then he shall bear her iniquity. In other words, if her husband, knowing of this vow, decides to not let her keep the vow, then he takes the punishment for her. In the same way that God or Jesus, our better husband for all of us, because we're the bride of Christ, we're the church. Christ takes our punishment for us for the vows that we break, the vows that we make to ourselves, to God and to others. And you know, the laws in this very book that we break all the time, Christ, our husband, he takes that punishment for us. He took the punishment for us, and thanks to him we can be forgiven and reconciled to God. And all of these sacrifices and times that God commands Israel to observe, every book, every law of the book of the Old Testament is directly pointed at Christ and what Christ has done for us. And it's amazing when, even when you read shallow into these scriptures, like just reading it on the surface, but if you stop to think, you don't have to go very deep, but if you like I said, if you stop to think when you're reading shallowly, even then you can see just the how amazing it is, and it points to Christ, and it makes us grateful that we don't have to we don't have to worry about, are we measuring up, because we can't measure up, and Christ took that punishment because we can't measure up for us, so that we can be credited with that righteousness. And only when we are credited with his righteousness can we begin to even live lives that resemble holiness. And guys, I'm sorry that this review was actually very, very, very shallow, more than usual. But I pray that God uses it anyway. I pray that this video blesses you and reaches the right people. Anyways, thank you guys for your time, and I'll see you guys in the next video. God bless you all.